Hey everybody, welcome to another CrushLivePoker.com hand review. And live poker, at least in Texas, is back. The Texas Card House and TCH Austin is now doing their live stream once again. We're going to take a look here at a very interesting hand that went down involving aces and a 3-bet pot in a very unorthodox line that was taken by the small blind player. If you haven't watched Texas Card House and TCH Austin, if you haven't watched TCH live, the show goes on Mondays and Thursdays from 6 to 10 p.m. Central Time. And if you're watching this video when it comes out on Saturday, I am actually going to be doing the commentary for the next game, which is a 5-5 match the stack game. And that game will be June 8th, Monday, June 8th at 6 p.m. Central Time. Come join me for 4 hours of live stream cash action. And I was talking to the owner of TCH, and there are a few spots available for the game. I will actually put the information in the description about how you can play in the game and how you want to play in future TCH live games. They do a smaller game on Thursdays, which is a 1-3 no limit match the stack. If you're not familiar with Crush Live Poker, of course, we do live training videos and we do a no limit video every week. And here's going to be the last hand of the video that went up on Crush Live Poker this week. And if you want to check out the site, you can use the coupon code that I'll put in the description. But Crush Live Poker, we've been doing training specifically over live no limit hold'em cash since back in the beginning of 2014. And then finally, our last hand here. This one doesn't have that much to do necessarily with continuing, although Anthony takes sort of this line once again of kind of playing an overpair cautiously with respect to the board, which might be overthinking it at these stakes in live poker of 5-5 against a super, super wide opponent that's going to be calling extremely wide and also defending to pre-flop re-raises really, really wide. When people start to look at the boards that are sometimes reflected as a check in single raise pots and 3-bet pots versus a field player, if you're just pumping in sort of equilibrium ranges into a solver, that's going to give you a response of these boards that are going to be checked. But if you add a bunch of hands into the person's calling range on the field, that's how you get the accurate answer. And more often than not, when you're up against somebody who's VPIPing, say 40 or 50%, you're going to get to bet a lot for value. So here, Nate is going to make a raise with 4-5 of diamonds, which is obviously fine here from the button, playing 1800 effective. And Anthony here is going to 3-bet to 75, which is really, really small, which I think sort of is mistake number one, because from some of the previous hands that we saw from this night, Nate was pretty call happy. So you're losing some value. Typical 3-bet sizing here, coming off of a raise of 25 or 30 would basically be 4x. I mean, I would definitely go to at least 120 here, especially against a guy that's very, very call happy, at least 100 to 120, something like that. So Anthony goes basically almost like a min raise. And I think he's trying to have Nate call, but not realizing that Nate was basically calling larger amounts as well. And sometimes I will. And the only time that I would really take this type of sizing here would be in a situation where someone was really, really short and I didn't want to look like I was committing myself. I wanted to make it look like there was a possibility that there was some fold equity if the guy came over the top. And I also wanted to keep him in the hand. I knew that it wasn't really important to build a pot up here. So Nate makes the call and the board comes out Jack 4-9. And this is what we're talking about here as it sort of reflects like on a board like this. We've got a configuration of a button open and a 3-bet by the small blind. But the other thing that I think is kind of quirky in this hand, what Anthony has to realize is that his sizing was so small that there was basically no chance that Nate's really going to ever open and fold a hand to a min raise. So Nate, if say he's opening 40 to 50% of his hands and he's defending 90% to basically a min 3-bet pre-flop, he's going to have all those hands, which means that it's even better for Anthony here because there's going to be a lot of Jack X and 9X and things like that represented. So I don't really agree with this check here by Anthony given the situation. And even if it was standard sizing and even somewhat standard defending from a live player, I'm still for the most part betting here. Unless I'm against a really, really tough player that can make my life miserable in position, that has a really, really good sort of sense for ranges and board textures, I'd say 9 times out of 10. And you don't really have to worry about this at the 5-5 level of live play. So I'm most likely going to be betting. Now, maybe Anthony had a plan here where he thought that if he checked, Nate would start to bluff at it. It's interesting with Nate's hand. I think that, yes, I would defend here, obviously to a 3-bet with 4-5 suited. And if my opponent checked, this is going to be a bet for me more often for, protection. We've got decent backdoors here. We have a backdoor flush draw. So the 4-5, the 4X with a backdoor is going to be the ones that are chosen to bet more often than the 4X without. But even more so, the 4X needs more protection than, say, like a Jack X or a 9X here. And you will oftentimes see players here have ace king, have ace queen in check. Normally, I would say as a live pattern, when somebody checks this board, it usually means in live poker that they don't have an overpair. Your hand needs some protection against those types of hands. Usually you're not going to see aces here reflected by this preflop action. But it goes check, check. Turn now is the 8 of clubs. And Nate now is going to bet 150, which is kind of interesting here because now the board starts to get stickier, although he can get called by a wider range of 10x and things like that. So now he goes check and then he sort of sized up, whereas kind of a more standard thing might be to bet the flop and then check this turn if called. But here he bets 150. And Nate, again, Nate has a simple fold here. I don't want to go too far down into, Nate's holding, because the whole purpose of this hand is to look at the way that Anthony played it in this very, very interesting line as we move across to the river. But, at this point, I'm just going to fold here. I'm just going to fold 4-5, I think, to a full pot size bet when we don't pick up backdoor diamonds. But he does make the call, and we roll to the river. And the river here is a 9. By the way, moving back to the turn too, how often do you see somebody check ace king and then bet full pot on an 8 turn? Now, maybe you could make the case that he might have like an ace 10 hand, maybe sometimes like an ace queen, probably not ace king per se. So the river now is a 9. And obviously it can be a little bit precarious for the preflop raiser if the preflop raiser had gone bet flop, check turn, check, check, and river, because the button is going to have some 9s in his range. And depending on how often the button checks back with a jack, right, on the turn. But given this particular line of check, check, flop, bet on turn, and now the river here is a 9, it's probably pretty close on whether or not you want to check as a bluff catch, or because the thing is that if most players are betting off a jack on the flop, he doesn't really arrive here with many jacks. So do we want to get value here, let's say here from an 8, right? Should we be betting here at the end to get value, from an 8, or check call busted club draws? Although Anthony does have the ace of clubs in his hand. So he's going to check, and, more often than not, Nate should just check this back, right? He beats ace king. It doesn't really make any sense really here to bet, unless somehow he thinks he's going to get value from ace king. I've made this play very, very occasionally if I'm in Nate's spot where it gets checked back on the flop, we call a turn bet, and now the river is a total brick, and we think that our opponent, there's a very good chance that our opponent might actually have ace high. Because everything bricked out, we actually make a value bet here with 4x to get looked up by ace king, ace queen. That could be a viable line in some situations, depending on the sizing. So he comes out and he sort of bets, and he bets 200. So, if he gets called by like an ace high type of hand, he's looking like a genius here. So he's betting about half the size of the pot. And now Anthony takes a really, really interesting, or makes a really, really interesting decision. He's going to check min raise the river here to 400. So he doesn't buy the fact that Nate really has a 9. He rightly snuffs out that it looks like that this is not a bluff sizing either, that Nate is basically taking some hand that's worse than aces for some value, and he's going to try to price Nate in on the river. Look at this line. Flop, check, check, pot, turn sizing, call, and then a check raise on the river when the middle card basically pairs. And this might, like I said, might have been like a little bit of a live read. In theory, if you were checking a bluff catch here, this would probably just be a call. And I think it's probably pretty close here with this sizing here, native 200. But if Nate had bet even a little bit smaller in relation to the pot in terms of sizing here, like say he had bet maybe like, say 100 into a pot of 455, then you're really looking at what appears to be value in a spot like that. And that's when I can sometimes get on board with actually taking a hand and raising it for value that was otherwise going to be played as a check call, as a bluff catcher. Like I said, this one's really close because it's sort of in between sizing 200 into 455, and he's going to make this check raise. And when is the last time? I mean, for Nate, it's just a situation where, yeah, you're getting an incredible price, but when's the last time you've ever seen somebody take like an ace high type of hand and min check raise here as a bluff? Because remember, if you're betting to make it look like you busted out on 10x or clubs to try to get called by ace high is going to call. Why would they min check raise you? You know, I think it would be even more curious, or what would be more curious is perhaps a larger check raise at the end that might be an ace high, maybe turning their hand into a bluff or something like that, or some other hand, not thinking that they have showdown value. You know, something, you know, along those lines, not a min raise here, which is basically inviting a call. Obviously, it's very, very easy for us to say because we can see the cards. He is going to make the call. And that's a nice little value line here, you know, by Anthony. But again, what I would say, most of the time, I would say pretty much bet your hand off for value. This was a very unorthodox line that ended up working out. Normally what I would do is bet flop, possibly check turn. And then if it went check, check on turn, the river's kind of dicey. If we think that our opponent is going to be betting a lot of jack X off on turn, it's a really shitty river for aces. Because when our opponent checks back turn and he doesn't have jack X, that's going to leave a fair amount of 9X. And it's like, what else is he calling with? He's not going to call with like king, queen. And usually he's not going to be calling with 4X if we bet the river either. So I'm all for going for max value. And I think that Anthony was going to play the river as a bluff catch, but then he sort of sussed out the fact that the sizing was very, very value-y, but it wasn't indicative of a 9, and he gets that extra value. Thanks for watching this video, and if you like what you've seen, please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to check out poker training videos, head over to crushlivepoker.com. You can use the coupon code in the description for the first month for free.